In the previous video, we said that a sample is a subset of the population, the individuals that we actually collect data from. So why is it necessary that we take a random sample? To start with a really simple example, we're going to treat the Gettysburg Address 7 years ago. We're going to treat this as a population of words. So we have all the words in the Gettysburg Address, only 268, surprisingly short. And let's say we want to estimate the average word length for all the words in this population. So one way that we could do it is just to circle any old word that we want to include in the sample, whichever words jump out to us. So this is what I saw just when I kind of looked at it. These are 5 words that jumped out to me. So then I'm going to take each word, count the number of letters. So proposition has 11 letters, dedicate has 8, and so on. And I'm going to find the average word length. So this comes out to be 7.2. So 7.2 letters per word. But this is actually a good bit too high. The population average, if we were to take the average word length for all of the words in this population, is only 4.3 letters. So we've overestimated by a good bit here. And overestimating, that's actually pretty typical if you just let people circle any 5 words that they want to and use that as their sample. So this method tends to overestimate. So I actually did this. I used to teach AP statistics, and I actually had my students do this, take a sample of 5 words and calculate the average word length. So that's what's showing in this graph down here. So when you see these dots, each dot in this graph represents a sample mean. So each dot represents a statistic, a sample mean, from a different sample. So I had 11 students in class that day. Each of them took their own sample and calculated a sample mean. So you can see here that most of the dots are higher than the population mean. There was one that was too low, but there was definitely a tendency to overestimate. So let's consider another method, a simple random sample. So to do a simple random sample, we're going to start by listing all the cases in the population. So in this case, we already have that. We have a list of all the words in the Gettysburg Address. And then there's a couple ways to do the random sampling. We're just going to number them. So there's 268 words, so I'm going to number them 1 to 268. And then I just need 5 random numbers. So I'm going to generate 5 random numbers in that range. So 5 random numbers from 1 to 268. Okay, so you can see I started numbering here 1, 2, 3, 4, and we go all the way to 268. I just generated some random numbers. You can use a random number generator online. These are the numbers that I got. So then I'm going to match those up with the words. So like 6, 7 years ago. Ago is the 6th word, so I'm going to include that in my sample. And then I take the length of each word. So using this, I got an average word length of 4.4. So this estimate still isn't perfect, but it's definitely a lot closer. And if you take a look at the results from when my AP statistics students do it, you can see that some of the estimates are too high and some of them are too low, but they're sort of centered in the right place. So I did want to point this out, that the statistics are still going to vary. Right? They still vary sample to sample. So even if you do everything right, you're still not going to get the perfect estimate of the population parameter. Your statistics are going to vary. And that's called sampling variability. So that's just the idea that if I take a random sample and calculate a statistic, and you take a random sample and calculate a statistic, we're not going to get exactly the same thing. That's sampling variability. But if we look at the simple random sample, there's no consistent tendency to over or underestimate. So some were too high and some were too low, but no tendency to over or underestimate. And if there's no tendency to over or underestimate, that's called an unbiased sampling method. So ultimately, that's why we like to use random samples. Random samples are unbiased. It's the best way to get a representative sample. We want a sample of words that's representative of the population, and the best way to do that is with random sampling. So obviously sometimes this isn't possible. It's not always possible to get a simple random sample, but in those cases you're going to have to work extra hard to sort of ensure that your sample is actually representative of the population. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to generalize your conclusions.